And thank you very much, Michelle, for keeping everybody awake. I am in the time slot of death. The food coma is well set in, and usually by now, people are asleep, and we are half an hour over time. So I want to commend the timekeepers for not making that happen. I wasn't going to use slides, partly because I've learned that when you are the seventh speaker of the day, if you have slides, you end up showing a lot of material that other people have already covered. But then, just about an hour ago, I figured I'll put some slides together without any pretty pictures. And I'm going to just use these as a sort of reminder of what I'm saying. This is the most important slide. At last count, there's 100,000 Mike Nelsons in America. If you want to find me, M. Nelson at CloudFlare, or better yet, at Twitter, M. Mike Nelson. I got on early. So I have an interesting background. I have a clicker that's not clicking. I did.
No, it's the other way around, probably.
Yeah. In the meantime, I will start.
Because you're not even putting it in there. That's not even used.
Okay. That's interesting.
There you go.
That's what I did.
No, it just takes a second.
Okay, so I've got a bizarre background. I went to Washington more than 25 years ago and ended up as Al Gore's science advisor. My claim to fame is I organized the very first Senate hearing about the internet in 1988. Vince Cerf spoke at the second hearing that we had on the internet. And ever since then, I've been working to make the internet better, mostly by stopping policymakers around the world from doing stupid stuff. So 80% of my resume is stuff I can't talk about, because it would be embarrassing to the stupid people who I prevented from doing the stupid stuff. But anyway, I went from the Senate, where I worked for 5 years, to the White House. I was there for the first 4 years of the administration, working on everything from Clipper chip and encryption to the 1996 Telecom Act to supercomputer research and FCC decisions. So I will manage myself then. Technology is wonderful when it works. So anyway, I left the White House, went to the FCC for a little while, then spent almost 10 years at IBM. And then in midlife, decided to take a sabbatical and teach at Georgetown. And so for 3 years, I was a full-time professor of internet studies, and I learned to give out reading lists. So I'm going to give a lot of reading material to you today. I'm also going to try to make this into a large seminar. So I want everybody here to be involved in a discussion about what's going to shape the Internet of Things. I still continue to teach as an adjunct professor at Georgetown, but for the last year I've been at CloudFlare, which is a web security firm based in San Francisco. How many people know about CloudFlare? Great. That's a very unusually high percentage. CloudFlare is 5 years old. We're about 250 people, and we're already handling about 8% of all the world's web requests. We were set up to protect websites from DDoS attacks by routing traffic through our 75 data centers around the world. So we're right in the middle of the internet, literally and figuratively, and I'm doing public policy around the world, trying to make sure that the internet can continue to grow and that our service can continue to thrive. So we're excited about the Internet of Things because more and more of the traffic that we're seeing is not web pages, it's people calling APIs. People calling devices. We have a very large contract with Fitbit. We have a fascinating partnership with MetaPack, which is a UK company for tracking materials that are being shipped. This is all about the Internet of Things, and it's where a lot of the growth in our company is going to be in coming years. When I came to Washington, I learned very quickly that writing a 300-page PhD thesis, which is what I did at MIT, was not going to be something I was going to do on Capitol Hill. I learned to be very succinct, very brief. And this is my list of what you need to have if you're going to make an argument in the policy world of Washington, or Brussels, or Japan. First, you need a good buzzword. Only 3 or 4 syllables. Iron Curtain. That's the ultimate buzzword. It shaped geopolitics for 50 years. Then you need a good bumper sticker. You only get 7 words, maybe 8, to explain what you're doing, why, and do it in a very evocative, powerful, memorable way that people will not only remember, but will repeat to other people. You need 2 or 3 good factoids, preferably true. When I grew up, I learned that 9 out of 10 dentists recommend Crest. That wasn't true. I'm still using Crest. You also need a good diagram. It's good to have a personal story that your audience can relate to, and it's great if you have a historical analogy. I learned that part from Senator Gore because he always talked about the information superhighway and how he had watched his father, Senator Gore Sr., push through the Interstate Highway Program. So if you have all those things, you're in great shape. Unfortunately, for the Internet of Things, we don't have these things. And worse, in most of the policy areas I'm going to describe, we have a bumper sticker on the other side. And one thing I learned very early on is you never want to get on the wrong side of a good bumper sticker. We would have President Gore if someone hadn't made up the idea that he claimed that he had invented the internet. I mean, it only took a few thousand votes, and that one bumper sticker, that one lie, was enough to convince people that he was a geek, a liar, and an egotist. And as a result, he didn't get elected president. So, what we're going to do today, this is audience participation time. You have to stay awake because we're going to do lots of surveys, lots of voting. I'm going to talk first about 7 myths about the Internet of Things. Very dangerous myths which policymakers believe in many cases and which are shaping the policies that are developing. And we're going to vote on which myths you're most worried about. Then I'll talk about the various policy issues which I think are going to be important. We'll have a little time to touch on issues that I didn't cover, and then we'll have a vote in which you get to pick the 1 or 2 things that you think are most critical. And then we'll finish with one slide on what you can do to help make the process work better. How many of you are at all involved in government policy? Is there anybody here? We got the front row. Okay, that's interesting. There's a segregation of the policy people in the front. Okay, so first myth. Karen has already debunked this. Several other people have debunked this. The first myth is the Internet of Things is not here yet. This is very wrong, but you do hear policymakers saying, well, we better start thinking about this. It's going to be here soon. This is a dangerous myth primarily because it's a good reason to wait, right? If it's not here yet, we can, plan it. We can get ready for it. So this is a very simple, but as I said, dangerous myth. A more important myth is that the Internet of Things is all about the Internet. I personally think Internet of Things is the worst possible buzzword we could have come up with for this phenomenon. First of all, it violates Nelson's law of buzzwords. Internet of Things, that's 5. And you don't come up with a vision of anything. There's no power behind that image. It was invented by the ITU, so it's not surprising that, it's not a sexy, cool word. It doesn't even sound better in French. But the fact is that we really should be talking about the COT, the cloud of things. Because what really matters? What matters is the data from all those things is going somewhere, and we're making it useful in the cloud. I've been pushing this idea for 3 years, and I've gotten nowhere. So I now have a better proposal, the COAT, the cloud of all things, COAT for short. And that's a nice evocative image, this infrastructure coating the world, tying it all together. But the fact is we have a lot of people in a lot of governments hearing the word Internet of Things and saying, oh, the Federal Communications Commission or the Telecom Ministry, they'll take care of this because it's about the Internet. No. Again, the real policy challenges are in the data side. And as a result, a lot of other agencies need to be more involved. In the US, the Federal Trade Commission, some of the state consumer agencies, there's a lot of other people who need to get smart about this, and I actually think the term Internet of Things gets in the way because it focuses too much on the communications. Almost as dangerous as myth number 3, the Internet of Things is all about the things. Has anybody heard of the right to the silence of the chips? Good. This was an idea floated about 8 years ago in Brussels by an official who's part of the French policy-making operation. He got Nelly Cruz, who was in charge of digital policy in Brussels, to say, you know, it's time that we think about the right to the silence of the chips. And the idea was that let's make sure every single thing connected to the internet, every single device, has some on-off switch, has some way that we can disable that device. And then if we want to, re-enable it. That might make sense if it's a $5 device. It does not make sense if it's a 2-cent sensor. And building in that kind of on-off capability would make it a $5 sensor. But this idea was floating around because we had a problem about privacy. Giving consumers the right to the silence of the chips seemed like a good idea. Okay, fourth myth, privacy is the most important policy issue. To hear some policymakers talk, it is the only policy issue. I think by the end of this talk, you will be convinced that there are a lot of other issues out there, and that privacy, while important, probably isn't the most important. At Cloudflare, we work very closely with Tim Sparapani, who works on policy issues for us in Washington. He's written a very useful one-page blog post for Forbes on the 4 flavors of the Internet of Things. When I was a consultant, I learned that everything has to be explained in a 2x2 matrix, or the CEO will not understand. So, think of a 2x2 matrix. On the right side is one entity, on the left side, multiple entities. And in the top are people, and the bottom are things. And so what Tim has done is said, okay, first we have the Internet of me. Fitbit's a good example. I have one person, one set of sensors monitoring me, and I control the data, and I know when the data is being collected, and I know where the data is going. Then there's the Internet of us, much more complicated, where you have systems that are actually monitoring a large group of people, like all of us in this room, perhaps. We'd have some sensors that would be detecting what everybody was doing. Much bigger privacy issues there. With Internet of me, you can design that system so I really know where the data is and when it's being collected and how it's being used. Internet of us, more difficult. It's even easier with the things. If we're just measuring trees, that's not a problem. That's the Internet of those. We're looking at data for thousands of inanimate objects. And then we have the Internet of that, which is I'm tracking that one cow. And again, that's a well-defined problem. For 2 of those situations, there's no privacy issue at all, because we're talking about trees and cows. So we have to subdivide the issues and realize that privacy does not apply everywhere, and it wouldn't make sense to have one universal privacy policy for every device, everything, every application. This is related to the 5th myth that I want to share, which is that the old privacy paradigms can just be automatically implemented in this new world. The right to the silence of the chips was an effort to do that. The old model from 35 years ago from the OECD privacy principles is notice and consent. I have to tell you what data I'm collecting, and you have to consent to that. That really barely works today with the web when we're confronted with hundreds of privacy policies every month. It certainly doesn't work in a world where we have 50 or 100 devices that we interact with every day, and we have to somehow keep track of consent forms for each of those devices. That's not going to happen. I would argue that we have to think a lot about a transparency policy rather than a privacy policy. So in the world I envision, you're going to be monitored a lot more, But you're going to know how you're monitored, and you're going to have a sense of why you're being monitored, how the data is secured, and there's going to be a feedback loop where people who aren't doing a good job go out of business because other competitors do a better job. Sixth myth, we just need some more standards. I don't think so. We have plenty of standards out there already. Actually, you heard earlier, we probably have way too many standards, particularly too many proprietary standards that are building stovepipe solutions. Certainly, the IETF has done a great job of laying the foundation and giving us the technology we need. At CloudFlare, we're pushing out many of the standards the IETF has developed over the last 10 or 15 years to make the internet safer, more secure, more reliable. Last year, in September, we announced that we were going to adopt the World Wide Web Consortium standard for HTTPS. We doubled the number of websites that supported that standard in less than a month. We've also pushed IPv6 very hard, and in 2 years, we've seen our traffic go from a small fraction of 1% to over 2.5% now, and it's on an upward curve. Same thing with DNSSEC and some of the technology needed to make the domain names more secure. Mareka gave a great talk about how we need to do that, and at Cloudflare, we are in the business of making the domain name system more secure and safer. And then the last issue is kind of odd. There's actually two myths, and they're contradictory myths. One myth is the internet's a mature technology, time to regulate it. And the other one is even worse, which is, oh, this Internet of Things, it means we need a new internet. We need to completely redo things because the internet's not secure enough, and it's not reliable enough, and it's not whatever enough. Karen mentioned how the ITU on the Wikipedia page for the Internet of Things has been trying to insert the new official ITU definition, which doesn't refer to the internet. And you hear people in the corridors of the ITU saying, you know, that domain name system, it's just not going to work with the Internet of Things. And they've got their own ideas about what should come next. And again, I think these are very dangerous myths, but they are out there. So, my first question for all of you, any of you courageous enough to come up to the microphone and give us one or two more myths? Does anybody else have something they're scared about? Okay. If you have other ideas, come up to me later. This is a work in progress. Vint, do you have a myth?
I'm just sitting here going like this.
Okay. 7 myths is enough. Okay. This is actually a trial run. My CEO is going to go to Cancun in June when it's too hot for tourists to go. The OECD is having a ministerial meeting on the digital economy. Every 8 years, they have a major conference on what policy is needed, and he'll be talking on some of these issues. So, as I say, I'm looking for new feedback on this talk. Literally, these slides are 2 hours old. Do you have a myth?
Yes. The second IoT device you buy will interoperate with the first IoT device.
Okay. That's a very good myth. Yes, okay. We'll add that to the list. If you didn't hear that, the myth is that the second IoT device you buy will interoperate with the first. Okay, so now we're going to do a vote. You have 2 hands, so you get 2 votes. If you want, you can put up both your hands if you feel strongly about one particular myth. So the question is, which 1 or 2 of these 8 myths are you most concerned about and are most likely to cause trouble in the policy world? So, how many of you are most concerned about the myth that the Internet of Things is not here yet? 1, 2, 3, 4, okay, 6. Okay. How many of you are concerned about the second item on the list, that the Internet of Things is all about the Internet? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay. How many of you concerned about the myth that the Internet of Things is all about the things? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. You get 2 points for using your cell phone. That was good, yeah. Okay. How many of you are most concerned about the myth that privacy is the only issue we need to worry about? Okay, Vint. Oh, okay, wow. 1, 2, okay. So, Paul, you vote that, you count that side, I'll count this side. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17. Okay, 17. 18. 35. Okay, we seem to have hit on one here. Okay, fifth myth. The old privacy paradigms can easily be applied to the new world. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 10, 27. Okay. Okay. We just need some more standards. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay. 7. Okay. There were some people who were pretty emphatic about that. I should actually have counted the number of people who put 2 hands up. Okay. And this idea that the internet is either already here and done or that we need to replace it. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. Okay. And then this idea that things just should interoperate, that's a myth that we have to be wary of. Everybody ran out of votes. Okay, good. Okay, so the winner is, quite convincingly, number 4 and number 5. So we're very concerned that policymakers are so fixated on the privacy issues that they're missing everything else. And so what is everything else? This is everything else. Almost all of these issues were touched on in the Internet of Things report from the Internet Society. I'm just going to go quickly through these. Some of these are issues I've been working on for 20 years. In some cases, we haven't gotten very far. But clearly, number 1 on the list is security, because we have been talking about that a lot. That's a prerequisite for privacy. And that is something that everybody in this room agrees we have to do more work on. The question is, what do the policymakers do that will actually be helpful? We just spent 2 years in the US Congress arguing over the Cybersecurity Information Sharing Act. And the whole focus was just on that one question: how do companies share more information with government? It really is not the answer to the problem. If you're going to focus on information sharing, much better to focus on sharing between companies. But we had a huge amount of discussion and a lot of controversy over that bill, and we finally got it, but it's like 5% of the problem. Privacy, we've already had a lot of discussion about, so I won't spend a lot of time on that. Reliability, that's one of the illities we don't hear very much about, and yet I would argue that the Internet of Things is going to have to be more reliable than the Internet itself, than the Internet we have today. I mean, so much more is going to be relying on it. Competition and interoperability. How do we make sure that we don't have siloed solutions and that things don't work together? We certainly have been seeing a centripetal force pushing solutions apart. We'll have one solution in one sector. Your car might be hooked up to one vendor, your garage door, another vendor. It would be nice if your car could talk to your garage door, but that's not necessarily going to happen. So we have to find some force that pushes people to make it all work together. We had that with the core internet. Metcalfe's law convinced everybody it was a good idea to get it all together. But as was expressed earlier, there's a lot of short-term gain that can be made if you can monopolize your little niche and keep everybody else out. Life cycle, another question. The Federal Communications Commission did a very interesting series of studies on this issue of internet policy for the Internet of Things. And one of the issues they surfaced about 2 years ago when I was working with them was this question of how do you make sure that you can retrieve things or somehow retrofit devices that might be in the field for 20 years and might be 2,000 feet down an oil well or sitting on the bottom of the ocean. Transparency. This is actually my candidate for the most important policy issue. Karen mentioned it a bit. We had a couple of questions about it. I would argue that if we can get transparency right, we can solve a lot of these other problems. We can actually provide positive feedbacks that would push companies to provide better security, better privacy protection. If they're more transparent about their business models and their business practices, that might actually convince companies to be more interoperable. In some cases, customers don't know they're buying into a walled garden, actually a locked garden. Liability. This is the other one that's at the top of my list. If we get this wrong, half of the great solutions of the Internet of Things go out the window. But we do have to address these issues, or else we're going to have court fights from here to eternity as problems appear and lawsuits are filed. Another important issue, particularly for Cloudflare, is data localization. What happens when countries like Russia announce that customer data for Russians must stay in Russia? Often the argument is made that they have to do that because that's a way to keep that data more secure and protect the privacy of citizens, but half the time it's also because it's a protectionist measure to favor companies that are already established in that country. And then, of course, it's also a law enforcement issue. If you're trying to track down criminals, you want to be able to knock on the door of the company down the street, not halfway around the world, to get data. Surveillance, another big issue. We've been reading a great deal about Apple and the FBI's request for keys and passwords. If the Internet of Things is built and law enforcement has access to every bit of data from every device, that's a very different world than the one we have today. And it would certainly mean that in repressive states, you would have control over the citizens like we've never seen before. So we have to get this question about law enforcement access, strong encryption, backdoors resolved. And if we do it right, many of these applications, I think, will blossom. If we don't, and everyone thinks that that Fitbit, that cell phone, that tag that's on their clothing is actually generating data that goes straight into the giant database in some intelligence agency or some law enforcement agency, then that's going to be a huge barrier to adoption and going to undermine trust. We haven't talked very much about spectrum, but that's clearly an issue, particularly because some of these devices are going to be dumping video. They're not just going to be clicking with a few bits every hour. They're going to be dumping megabits per second almost constantly. Another issue that came up, and I'm very glad that came up, is software licensing. A friend of mine goes so far as to say the Internet of Things could be the end of the ownership society. We're just not going to own things anymore. We see a little bit of this with Uber and how many people in their 20s are deciding they don't need to own a car because the sharing economy allows them to use other resources. But we could see that with almost everything, just as we've seen with books where you don't own the book, you kind of rent the bits. And in a few cases, the publishers have decided that they're going to recall the bits and you don't have them anymore. This could happen with some of the Internet of Things proposals that are out there, some of the new business models where you don't purchase something, you pay by the month to use something. And then I list here other. And sometimes that's the most dangerous category of all. One issue here is sector-specific regulation like you might have in medicine, in hospitals. Another example is something I just learned today from John Hagel. Has anyone heard of the acronym SODA? S-O-D-A? It's fear of deciding alone. So should I decide something by myself without data? It's similar to paralysis by analysis, but it's the big data version of this. It's a little bit like the fear of being left out, but it's the fear of deciding alone. So let's do a quick vote. You only get one vote this time. So let's go down the list and see which of these you think is going to be the most critical issue, the one that we should devote most of our time to in the coming 2 or 3 years so that we can get the Internet of Things right and policymakers don't get in the way. So, security. Figured a lot of hands would go up on this one. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, okay, 17. Okay, privacy. It's all related. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Okay, 10. Reliability. Okay, well, Vint doesn't, there's only one vote, Vint. But we will notice that Vint is giving 2 votes here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And Vint gets 2 votes. So you know, if you invent the internet, you get 2 votes. Okay, competition and interoperability, making sure it all works together. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay. Life cycle issues, making sure that this is a very smart man here, so if he's voting on this, it must be important. Okay, got 2 votes, but it's 2.5 because Hinden gets 1.5. Transparency. How do we make sure we know what's actually going on out there? So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Okay.
Mike, are we allowed to vote more than once on?
No, only one time.
Okay.
Yep. Liability. Any lawyers in the room? 1. Okay. This could be the full employment for lawyers if we don't watch it, if we don't do this right. And the problem is that the policymakers have been unwilling or unlikely to get into the details and actually set liability standards. And so it means the courts are going to decide. Data localization. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, 4 votes. Good. Surveillance. 1, 2, 3, 4. It'd be interesting to know how that question would look in different countries. Spectrum. I know this isn't a spectrum crowd. Okay. Software licensing, the idea that you could have your use of these devices totally controlled. 1. Okay. And I forgot to ask if anybody had any other topics. If anybody has another topic they want to put up and just yell it out.
Affordable access.
Affordable access, yes. That's it's a little bit of a bias here. We're kind of a first world problem. We're kind of getting there, but a lot of other countries aren't. Yes? Accessibility, accessibility for the disabled. Right, okay. As opposed to access for everyone. Okay, in the very back? Life safety. Tell me more. Okay. Okay, and we can hack pacemakers, all the rest. Okay, very good. Okay, so it looks like, again, security and privacy are at the top of the list, but transparency is up there, and so is interoperability. Okay, thank you very much. That was very helpful. I hope you learned something, as I certainly did. So, where are these decisions being made? Well, clearly the Congress, parliaments, Brussels, the European Commission, regulators. Courts are making more and more decisions here. A lot of very important decisions on law enforcement access to devices, like tracking devices that might be used to track criminals. But I would argue most of the really important decisions, at least lately, have been made in boardrooms and by developers. They're the ones who are making things happen. They're making it possible. They're kind of making de facto policy in many cases. And the users, through their choices, are certainly making decisions that are affecting what the de facto policy is for the internet. In some cases, the users are even developing things, so they're user developers. I would actually say that I would fit them in with the developers, because I mean, a lot of the developers are plugging into the standards process, and the developers are driving the standards process. Because they come up with something, and then lo and behold, we need a standard. But it's a good point. Next version of the slide, I will say developers and standards makers. Let me finish with a little discussion about where we can hope to see the most progress the fastest. As I said, I do global public policy for CloudFlare, and it's very striking how different the culture of innovation is in different places. So I'll just focus on the West Coast, the East Coast, and Brussels. If you look around the world, people do think about this stuff very differently. In the West Coast, the guiding principle is the prototype principle. This is cool tech. What can we do with it? In the East Coast, the question is, how do we make as much money as possible? And sometimes that means slowing down someone else's innovation so you can keep the market to yourself. And then in Brussels, we have the precautionary principle. So how do we prevent anything bad from happening? The goal in the East Coast, innovation. The East Coast, the word is incubation. This is a made-up word. It's a wonderful word. It doesn't mean incubation, and it's the opposite of innovation. Incubation is what incumbents do. They try to stop other people from getting into their market. And so they do that in a lot of different ways: predatory pricing, getting regulators to regulate their competitors. And of course, in Brussels, the question is, how do we protect? How do we protect the rights of citizens? How do we protect unions? How do we protect jobs? Existing jobs, not new jobs that don't exist yet. In the West Coast, the key verb is create. Let's make a new product, a new service, a new business model, a new paradigm. On the East Coast, in contrast, the important verb is litigate. Who can we sue to slow down their progress and maximize our profit? And of course, in Brussels, the key verb is investigate. Let's study it for 3 years and figure out a plan. You can tell a lot by a region or a country by its heroes. Here, of course, it's Steve Jobs, Mark Zuckerberg. On the East Coast, it's the Winklevoss twins, who sued Mark Zuckerberg. And in Brussels, it depends whether you're French or German. It's either Kant or Descartes. We won't mention what century they're from. But it does make a difference. The key question for our age is what Asia will do. And so far, we've seen a little bit of the West Coast, and we've seen a lot of the East Coast, a lot of obstructionism in some countries. But because I'm a techno-utopian, cyber-libertarian optimist, I think we can win. I think the West Coast can actually push through new innovations, push the policy process in the right direction, and develop an Internet of Things that meet our needs. So what can you do? The last slide. First of all, everyone needs to go and read the Internet Society's report on the Internet of Things. I have read countless reports and been to dozens of meetings on the Internet of Things where I've spoken, I've moderated, I've attended. That report does the best job of defining the policy space, describing the key questions, and it also, for a professor, it has a wonderful bibliography, all the really important articles to read. Clearly, keep on innovating, keep prototyping, keep trying things. But as you do it, make sure you're tuned into the policy debate. So you don't do something stupid on the innovation side that will run head on to the policy side, something that's unnecessarily in conflict with the needs of citizens and policymakers. And speak up. Those of you who live in this area are blessed by having a whole lot of congressmen and congresswomen who really care about this stuff. Just on Tuesday, Nancy Pelosi, Anna Eshoo, Zoe Lofgren, and Representative Honda had a half-day session on what they can do to spur innovation and how they can update the Democrats' innovation agenda. So they're ready to listen, but you need to give them good news. Tell them about the cool things that are happening. They don't hear good news very often. I worked in government for 9 years. You're where all the bad news comes. Come in and give them some good news. Tell them what we can have. And when there is a problem, there's a policy that's getting in the way, give them the clear facts that they can use. Give them the bumper sticker. Give them the 2 or 3 factoids. And most importantly, give them the personal story that they can use to make the case for pursuing better policy. As you do that, try not to lobby. Try to educate. And the difference is that when you lobby, you come in and say, I got a problem, you got to do this for me. When you educate, you come in and say, the world can benefit if we do the right thing. Here is how. That latter approach is much more effective. It shows that we're all in it together. It's not a, I'm looking for a favor, can you do it for me? It's much more of, you can look really good if you can lead the way to the new world. The other thing that is missing right now with the Internet of Things is a vision. Michelle did a great job of giving the first part of a vision. What does the normal person in America do with the Internet of Things in a few years? The part that's missing that we really need is the story that tells how those various policy issues we outlined get addressed in that new world. And we have to describe that part of it as well. We have to describe how better transparency, more choice, new technologies can give us a way for everyone to feel secure that this Internet of Things will be secure, provide privacy, be reliable, not kill anybody. That's part of the story. That's part of the vision. And we have to get that part right, too. When I was in the Clinton administration, I was very glad to be part of a trilogy of reports. In 1993, we wrote the National Information Infrastructure Agenda for Action. It described this world that looks a lot like today. Actually, it looked more like 2005, maybe 2010. But we actually got a lot of the forecast of the future technologies right. 2 years later, we did the Global Information Infrastructure, and we talked about how it would benefit the world, from Africa to Vietnam to Bolivia. And we got a lot of that right. And we laid out clear principles for policy that guided the administration for 8 years. And then we did the Magaziner report in 1997. Karen was part of this as well. And that laid out the vision for e-commerce. And not only did it lay out a vision, it stated very clearly the policy issues that need to be addressed. And it challenged industry to fix them. Privacy, inappropriate content you want to protect your children from, copyright, spam. It didn't say the government was going to solve the problem. It challenged industry to do it and threatened that if they didn't, the government would step in and do something stupid. And lo and behold, the combination of that threat and the creativity of this industry solved most of the problems that made e-commerce possible in this country and around the world. We can do the same thing for the Internet of Things, but we have to help get the positive vision and provide the positive solutions that will solve some of the policy problems we outlined here. I hope this has been a little provocative. I see most people are still awake because I made you put your hands up, and I am very glad to answer a question or two, but I'm cognizant of the fact that I only have about 3 minutes left. So thank you very much, and you have my email address if you have any follow-up questions, and I'll be here for the rest of the afternoon.
Yes, we do welcome at least 2 questions.
Is all that clear?
Yeah, feel free to walk up to the microphone.
Okay, a question here? No. Can you come to the microphone so that they can hear it online?
Yes.
We have thousands of people watching everything that happens here.
And we're going to have the panel discussion after the last speaker, so we'll have even more to discuss, but please. Yeah.
Hello? Yeah. It was very US-centric and Western world-centric, right? Like probably if the IoT devices, probably 50 billion devices, probably 2/3 of the devices may end up somewhere else.
Yep.
So no thought.
Well, I would say it was even more than that. It was very Northern California-centric, yes, because that was really what I'm focusing on here. But your point is taken. I mean, there are countries that are well ahead of us in experimenting with this. Some countries that don't have as much concern about privacy. Some of the Gulf states in particular have been doing some very exciting things. China has as well. They haven't had to justify the amount of data that they collect on their citizens.
Sure.
But thank you very much for pointing that out, and I was cognizant of the fact that I said parliaments, and that means everybody.
Yeah.
There's a lot of very important things going on in some very interesting places. We had a speaker from Estonia earlier, and what's going on there is quite extraordinary. So they're mostly on e-government, but they're doing some Internet of Things as well. But thank you very much for making that comment, and certainly the version of this speech that our CEO gives in June will be a global speech. Thank you.
Thank you.
I think this is global. It's broadcast everywhere. Michael, great roadmap, and thank you for the guidance on communication. I got COAT. I won't forget it. What did it stand for?
What's that then?
COAT.
COAT.
I
Cloud of all things.
Thank you.
Right.
Okay.
And it's 4 syllables.
Got it.
Okay. Thank you for asking. I haven't trademarked it either. It's open source. You know. Okay. Well, thanks again. And again, these slides will be available, and I'm happy to answer any questions. Just tweet me at Mike Nelson.
Thank you very much, Mr. Nelson.